Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. And we're currently reading the book Rulers of Evil by F. Tupper Saucy. And we'll begin at the beginning of the paragraph where we left off yesterday. We're learning a little bit about the art of war, remembering that the Jesuit order is the military and intelligence wing of the Roman Catholic Church. Their purpose, first of all, is to eradicate Protestantism and to create a global government for the Pope, to raise the papacy to a world sovereign. And that's what they intend to do, and they use the most sophisticated arts of war that is known. And yesterday, when we concluded the program, we were talking about Sun Tzu, the Oriental warrior who demonstrated his art of war to the king of O, an Oriental king, and he is trying to convince the king that he can effectively defend his realm against his neighbors, his warring neighbors, and he demonstrates his art of war by training his wives. And we were in the midst of that story, and I'll begin at a paragraph, at the beginning of the paragraph. It says, once the king had retired to his apartments, the warrior thought only of executing his commission. He asked for weapons and all the military equipment needed for his newly created soldiers. While waiting for everyone to be ready, he led his troops into one of the courtyards of the palace which seemed the best suited for his work. Soon the items he had requested were brought to him. Sun Tzu then spoke to the princesses, quote, "Here you are," he said, "under my direction and my orders. You must listen to me attentively and obey me in whatever I command you to do. That is the first and most essential military law. Make sure you don't break it. By tomorrow, I want you to perform exercises before the king, and I intend for them to be done perfectly." Unquote. After these words, he strapped on their swords and put spears in their hands, divided them into two groups, and put one of the favorite princesses at the head of each. Once the arrangement was made, he began his instructions in these terms, quote, "Can you tell the difference between your chest and your back, and your right hand and your left hand? Answer me." At first, the only response he received was some bursts of laughter, but he remained silent and very serious. "Yes, of course," the ladies then replied in one voice. "If that is so," resumed Sun Tzu, "then listen carefully to what I am going to say. When the drum strikes one beat, you will remain as you are, only paying attention to what is before your chest. When the drum strikes two beats, you must turn so that your chest is in the place where your right hand was before. Instead of two beats, you hear three. You must turn so that your chest is precisely where your left hand was before. But when the drum strikes four beats, you must turn so your chest is where your back was, and your back was where your chest was." Quote, it says, quote, "What I just said may not be clear enough. Let me explain. A single drum beat means that you must not change your position. You must be on guard. Two beats means you must turn right. Three beats means you must turn left. And four beats means you make a half turn. I will explain even more. This is the order I shall follow. First, I will strike one beat. As that signal, you will be ready to receive my orders. A few moments later, I will strike two beats. Then, altogether, you will turn to the right with gravity, after which I will not strike 3 beats, but 4, and you will make a half a turn. I will then have you return to your first position, and as before, I will strike 1 beat. At the first signal, be ready. Then I will strike not 2 beats, but 3, and you will turn left. At 4 beats, you will complete the half turn. Have you well understood what I'm saying? If you have any difficulties, you have but to speak to me of them, and I shall attempt to explain the matter. We have understood, replied the ladies. If that is so, responded Sun Tzu, I will begin. Do not forget that the sound of the drum takes the place of the general's voice, but he is the one who is giving you the orders. After repeating his instructions 3 times, Sun Tzu again aligned his small army, after which he had the drum strike 1 beat. At that sound, all the ladies began to laugh. At 2 drum beats, they laughed even louder. Ever serious, the general spoke to them thus: It is possible that I did not explain clearly enough the instructions I gave you. If that is so, it is my fault. I will attempt to remedy it by speaking to you in a way that is more accessible to you. At once he repeated the lesson 3 times in other terms. And then we will see, he added, if you obey me any better. He had the drum strike 1 beat, and then 2. Seeing him look so serious, and given the strange situation they found themselves in, the ladies forgot to obey him. After attempting in vain to stop the laughter that was choking them, they finally let burst forth loudly. Sun Tzu was in no way disconcerted, but in the same tone he had used when speaking to them before, he said, If I have not explained myself clearly, or if you had not assured me in unison that you understood what I said, you would in no way be guilty. But I spoke to you clearly, as you admitted yourselves. Why did you not obey? You deserve punishment, and military punishment. Among the makers of war, whoever does not obey the orders of the general deserves death. Therefore, you will die. After that short preamble, Sun Tzu ordered the women who formed the 2 lines to kill the 2 that were leading them. Just then, one of the men whose job it was to guard the women, seeing that the warrior was not joking, ran to warn the king of what was happening. The king sent the king sent someone to Sun Tzu to forbid him from going any further, and in particular from mistreating the 2 women he loved the best, and without whom he could not live. The general listened with respect to the words that were spoken on behalf of the king, but he refused to bow to his wishes. Go tell the king, he replied, that Sun Tzu believes him to be too reasonable and too just to think he might have changed his mind so soon, and that he truly wishes to be obeyed in what you have just told me on his behalf. The prince was the lawmaker. He would not give orders which would sully the dignity he vested in me. He asked me to train 180 of his wives as soldiers. He made me their general. The rest is up to me. They disobeyed me, they will die. So saying, he pulled out his sword, and with the same calmness that he had displayed until then, he cut off the heads of the 2 who were leading the others. He immediately put 2 others in their place and had the drum strike the various beats he had explained to his troops. And it was as if those women had been professional soldiers all their lives. They made their turn silently and impeccably. Sun Tzu spoke thus to the envoy. Go tell the king, he said, that his wives know how to drill. Now I can lead them to war, make them affront all sorts of evils and perils, and even make them pass through water and fire. Unquote. Then the king learned what had happened. He was penetrated with the deepest sorrow. With a great sigh, he said, Thus have I lost what was dearest to me in this world. Have that foreigner return to his country. I do not want him, nor his services. What have you done, barbarian? How can I go on living? And so on. As unconsolable as the king was, time and the circumstances soon made him forget his loss. His enemies were ready to descend upon him. He asked Sun Tzu to return, made him general of his armies, and with his help he destroyed the Chu kingdom. Those of his neighbors who had formerly been the most worrisome were now penetrated by fear at the mere mention of the glorious acts of Sun Tzu, and thought only of living peacefully under the protection of a prince who had such a man at his service. This introduction confirms that Pope Paul III's war declaration, Regimini Militantis Ecclesia, is about protecting the life of the nation, which is the Roman Catholic Church. Protecting the Roman Catholic Church may require the superior general to sacrifice his soldiers, his citizens, and if need be, his sovereign, the Pope. In a very real sense, the great general is so unscrutably alone, so omnipotent, that he is at war with everyone. Sacrificing his own, much as the pagan god Saturn, the grandfather god of Rome, devoured his own children, in order to defeat an enemy short of coming to blows, this is a great general's legitimate obligation. Sun Tzu writes, quote, "Without giving battle, without spilling a drop of the enemy's blood, without even drawing a sword, the clever general succeeds in capturing cities. Without setting foot in a foreign kingdom, he finds the means to conquer them. He acts in such a way that those who are inferior to him can never guess his intentions. He has them change location, even taking them to rather difficult places where they must work and suffer. When a clever general goes into action, the enemy is already defeated. When he fights, he alone must do more than his entire army, not through the strength of his arm, but through his prudence, his manner of commanding, and above all, his ruses." Unquote. Lorenzo Ricci's most compelling ruse was disestablishing the Society of Jesus, a campaign that mimicked the collapse of the Knights Templar just 4 centuries earlier. With astonishing precision, the disestablishment ran concurrently with the escalation of hostilities between the American colonies and the British Crown. Now this is important that we understand that the fall of the Jesuit order, which culminated in their suppression by a bull, a papal bull, Dominus Ac Redemptor Noster, by Pope Clement XIV, coincided with the timing of the Revolutionary War. Now, F. Tupper Saucy is going to show us that it was the Jesuit order that fomented the discord between Protestant Great Britain and the new colonies, so as to separate them from their Protestant roots in Great Britain, and to see to it that the new government of the colonies embraced religious liberty, unlike Protestant Great Britain, and that the liberty of religious conscience in this country would allow Catholicism full freedom to practice their religion, whereas they were suppressed in Great Britain. And to cover up, to help disguise the Jesuit role in the fomentation of that discord between the colonies and Great Britain, this military genius the Jesuit general Lorenzo Ricci, for all intents and purposes, faked the death of the Jesuit order in that suppression. That's the thesis of F. Tupper Saucy in this book. Now, many may argue one way or another, but this thesis that F. Tupper Saucy is portraying in this book at least must be considered if we're to consider all possibilities about the founding of this country. Now, I'll continue with the book. It says, it was an amazing juggle that spanned 17 years. It saw Ritchie's secret liaison in and around the British Parliament buy or purchase legislation that inflamed his secret liaisons in and around the American colonial governments to formulate a culture of rebellion. So here he's clearly laying it out. Now, if we remember the Jesuit oath, it says that the Jesuits are to foment war between two parties that were at peace, and then to operate on both sides of the line, to have Jesuits on both sides manipulating the outcome of the war, and then being present to sign the terms of the peace. It's called the Hegelian dialectic. You have thesis, antithesis. You have conflicting parties. You incite violence, foment a war, operate on both sides of the conflict, manipulate the conflict in such a way that your desired outcome is the natural result. And then simply be there to make sure, in the signing of the terms of the armistice or the ceasefire, that your desired end is solidified in document in the ceasefire documents. So he's suggesting now, showing the Jesuit part on the British side of the conflict, that they had purchased certain legislation that would indeed foment a discord, irreconcilable difference between the British government, the Protestant Parliament of Great Britain, and the new colonies. He forms the thesis that in order for the Black Pope to achieve his desired ends, the colonies must separate from Protestant Great Britain. And that's how they did it. They fomented a rebellion. They created a culture of rebellion in the colonies against Protestant Great Britain by purchasing these laws. And it says, it saw his own visible army mute and defenseless, systematically assaulted by the European powers and eventually suppressed for all eternity by a 1773 papal bull. Now, the book says a brief, but even in this book, the author seems to vacillate between whether or not it was a brief or a bull. And I think Eric John Phelps has made it pretty plain that it was indeed a bull, and I've seen this written about in other books too, and they all say that it was a bull, which has a bull has more authority. A bull contains the character of infallibility. In other words, it can't be undone. Once a bull is written, that's dogma. All right. So the Jesuits are suppressed, even at this time, during the fomentation of this irreconcilable difference between the colonies in Great Britain. And he says, once the stage was set and the action scripted, It was the general slip into it saw the general slip into deeper cover to let the Protestant powers exhaust themselves in war that within a single generation resulted in a glorious Roman presence where once England had reigned. So he makes it pretty clear. The Jesuit general slipped into deep cover so as to appear to be completely out of the picture and simply stood back and watched Protestant Great Britain and the Protestant colonies fight it out. Now, what better way to achieve victory in the world than to pit your enemies together in battle, to destroy them, to destroy each other, and leave you the victor and also the appearance that you had absolutely nothing to do with the conflict? That is the genius of the Jesuit order. That is the application of the Sun Tzuan art of war. And the Jesuit general, Lorenzo Ricci, was a genius strategist in war. And if you look at all the circumstantial evidence, it's obvious, or at least formidable, that this is exactly what happened during the Revolutionary War. He says, clandestine military operations inspired by the ingenuity of Sun Tzu are virtually impossible to document. If strategic notes were taken, if written commands were given, they were carefully destroyed. Such that survived may have been spared in order to misinform. The mouths of covert operatives are kept shut out of a simple desire to stay alive. Sensational disclosures, too, we can presume, will be misinformational. To determine that Lorenzo Ricci did in fact mount any clandestine operation at all requires a careful evaluation of circumstantial evidence. Listen to the circumstantial evidence. Was there an outcome that benefited him and his sovereign? Did he have the authority, the motive, the resources, the ability, and the opportunity to do what created the outcome? As to outcome, English-speaking Protestantism did in fact violently divide, and the victorious party, moreover, invited Roman Catholic religionists to participate in its political government. As to authority for waging war against Protestantism, Regimini Militantis Ecclesia authorized the general to prosecute enemies of the Roman faith. As to motive, the Jesuit oath spiritually obligated the extirpation of Protestantism in both America and Great Britain. As to resources, the Black Papacy, even as its martial strategy brought on its own organization been brought to oblivion, had instant call on the vast reserve of Roman Catholic wealth, as the old Spanish proverb goes, Don dinero es muy católica. We'll talk more about it when we get back from the break. Listening to Inquisition Update on Radio Live.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on Internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. If you'd like to support Inquisition Update, keep this broadcast on the air, please support First Amendment Radio, who pays the bills. Now we're going to continue with the book Rulers of Evil by F. Tupper Saucy. In the tail end of this particular chapter, the 13 articles concerning military art, we're looking at the circumstantial evidence implicating Lorenzo Ricci and his Jesuit order in fomenting the rebellion, the Revolutionary War between Protestant Great Britain and the new colonies in the United States. Did Jesuit General Lorenzo Ricci have the authority, the motive, the resources, the ability, and the opportunity to do what created this outcome? As to outcome, English-speaking Protestantism did in fact violently divide. The colonies were separated from Great Britain, and the victorious party, the Roman Catholic Church, they were invited these Roman Catholic religionists in this country, as a result of that conflict, were invited to participate in the new government of this country, where they would not have had a hope of it prior to the Revolution. As to authority for war-making against Protestantism, Regimini Militatis Ecclesia authorized the Jesuit general to prosecute enemies of the Roman faith, particularly Protestantism, if you've read the Jesuit oath. And it's embodied in their constitution as well. Not only the papal bull that established the Jesuit order. It's clear as sunshine that the purpose for the creation of the Jesuit order was to destroy Protestantism and to raise the papacy to world supremacy. Now, as to motive, the Jesuit oath spiritually obligated the extirpation of Protestantism in both America and Great Britain. As to resources, the Black Papacy, even as its martial strategy brought its own organization to apparent oblivion, had instant call on the vast reserve of Roman Catholic wealth. As the old Spanish proverb goes, Don dinero es muy católico. Lorenzo Ricci's ability to direct an international covert operation was stated and defined by the momentous publication of the 13 Articles in what was then the language of the international diplomacy, English. Finally, a man commanded unlimited financial resources and unlimited obedience of an unlimited supply of well-trained personnel enjoys unlimited opportunity to do anything possible and some things deemed impossible. To deny that Lorenzo Ricci, the Jesuit general, orchestrated American independence may be to ignore his talent and to demean his office. That's pretty heavy from F. Tupper Saucy. He says, for anyone to deny that Lorenzo Ricci orchestrated American independence from Great Britain may be to ignore his talent and to demean his office. Let's move now to the next chapter and begin our examination of how the general did it. This is chapter 12 of the book, Lorenzo Ricci's War. Lorenzo Ricci's strategy of dividing the British imperial system can be discerned in events occurring as early as 1752. In that year, Catholic interests in America were rather poorly managed by the Congregation for the Propaganda at Rome, depending upon a tangle of ambassadors or nuncios and intermediaries in Madrid, Paris, London, and Brussels. The Jesuit mission was to consolidate these often adversarial parts into a dynamic and independent whole governed directly from the mind of the Black Papacy. In 1752, the Society of Jesus was brilliantly powerful and had been so for nearly a century. Most statesmen, a fine Jesuit historian has written, reckoned that the society was a major force in politics, an international great power, acting primarily for its own interests. Lorenzo Ricci had been spiritual father of this great power for nearly a year, although that title assured him of unanimous election as superior general upon the demise of General Luigi Centurioni. It presently endowed him with diplomatic oversight embracing the whole world. Ricci's particular geographic interests included France and its possessions in New France, the whole Mississippi Valley, from Canada and the Great Lakes down to the Gulf of Mexico, and England and its colonies in New England, all the lands to the south of French Canada, and north of Spanish Florida, stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific coast. Both empires were to a certain extent Jesuit-driven. Great Britain was run by the Catholic-loathing system of Freemasonry, whose highest adepts obeyed and revered an unknown superior. That unknown superior was the Jesuit general. That's the thesis that has been clearly developed by many researchers, that Freemasonry serves the Black Pope, unwittingly in the lower levels of Freemasonry, but the top uses the entire organization to serve the Black Pope's whims. It says France was run by Louis XV, who obeyed the same superior through his Jesuit confessor, Pierre de Sacy. De Sacy's good-natured ministry reduced the king's dinner on a strict fast day from 8 courses to 5 and limited his wine consumption to 3 glasses per sitting. Sun Tzu wrote, quote, "I demand the art of making enemies move as one wishes. Those who possess the admirable art know how to arrange their men and their army they command in such a way that they make the enemy come to them whenever they judge it appropriate. They know how to make generous gifts when appropriate, even to those they wish to conquer. They give the enemy, and the enemy receives. They abandon things to him, and he comes to take them. They are ready for anything. They take advantage of any circumstance. They do not fully trust those whom they employ, but choose others to be their overseers. They do not count on their own strength alone, but use other means which they believe can be useful to them. They consider the men against whom they must fight to be stones or pieces of wood, which they have been asked to roll down a slope. You, therefore, who are commanding an army, must act in such a way that the enemy is in your hands like a round stone that you can cause to be rolled down a mountain 1,000 paces high. Thus it will be recognized that you have power and authority, and that you are truly worthy of the position you occupy." Unquote. Lorenzo Ricci transformed British and French colonial personnel into round stones by creating a crisis between their conflicting imperial claims to dominion in North America. In 1752, his spiritual fatherhood directed French soldiers and their Indian allies to destroy the important British colonial trading center on the upper Great Miami River. Then followed the plundering, capture, or killing, not murdering, but papally absolved extirpating of every English-speaking trader in the upper Ohio Valley that the French and Indians could locate. Although these lands were legally British, dating from the grant to Virginia by King James I in 1609, the important Virginia families failed to empathize with the misfortunes of explorer inhabitants in such remote and undeveloped wilderness. But when, toward the ends of 1752, the Virginia government granted an additional 1,500,000 acres of Ohio Valley land, empathies burst into bloom. Suddenly, the Virginians had something to lose, and it was being lost to a band of Roman Catholics and their Indian converts. In 1753, French engineers constructed a chain of forts connecting Lake Erie with the Ohio River. The governor of Virginia dispatched a small militia to confront these Catholic trespassers. Leading the militia was a recent initiate into the Fredericksburg Masonic Lodge, 21-year-old Major George Washington. 21-year-old Major George Washington. Washington warned the garrison at Fort LeBoeuf that it was illegally occupying Virginia real estate, so notoriously known to be the property of the Crown of Great Britain. he read aloud the governor's demand that they depart. The French ignored him, and he returned home. Despite the clear indication that the French intended not to concede to the governor's demands, Virginia encouraged the Ohio Company to build a palisade fort at the fork where the Allegheny and the Monongahela rivers joined to create the Ohio River. Where Pittsburgh now stands at that juncture. It says the government pledged Virginian troops to support the venture. Construction began in the spring of 1754. Almost immediately, French and Indians descended upon the tiny crew of woodcutters and carpenters and overwhelmed them. By the time Washington, now lieutenant colonel, could reach the scene, he was forced by Catholic firepower to fall back to Fort Necessity. Here, Washington surrendered on July 4th. It was this clash between British and French armies that precipitated what is called by contemporary writers the Maritime War, or the Great War, or Great War for the Empire, or 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War. It could more appropriately be called Lorenzo Ricci's War. As these rounded stones began rolling, more succumbed to Ricci's gentle touch. The colony most affected by the fighting was Meek, Pennsylvania, the colony originally settled by adherents of the renowned Quaker leader William Penn. Penn had been dead a whole generation, and ownership of his colony had devolved upon a British corporation which included some of Penn's descendants and was known austerely as the proprietors. The proprietors wanted wars in Pennsylvania to be fought by Pennsylvanians. The Quakers, who controlled the assembly, abhorred the notion of Pennsylvanians bearing arms. Remember, the Quakers are non-combatants. They won't fight wars. By conscientious objection, Quakers do not participate in wars. And it says, when the assembly voted to raise a war chest, the Quakers stepped down and out of power. First, however, they appointed their most celebrated member, Dr. Benjamin Franklin, official printer of Pennsylvania's paper currency, to sail to London and represent them against the proprietors. Dr. Franklin, who happened to be Grand Master of Pennsylvania Freemasonry, that's key. He happened to be Grand Master of Pennsylvania Freemasonry, arrived in London to find that King George II, having made peace with France as recently as 1748, abhorred the proprietors. The king's attitude was, let Americans fight Americans. Franklin explained that Virginians, undisciplined militiamen, and the pacifists of Pennsylvania, speaking of the Quakers, were no match for seasoned French regulars and savage Indian braves. France was jeopardizing British imperial interests. The king acquiesced to Franklin's reasoning and ordered General Edward Braddock to take a small army to clear the forks of the Ohio of the French trespassers. He also sent Admiral Edward Basquelin's fleet to the Gulf of St. Lawrence to prevent the arrival of more French reinforcements in Canada. All this was in perfect obedience to Lorenzo Ricci's strategy of establishing a British military presence in America. The Crown ultimately would require the Americans to pay for this presence, which would expose the colonists to taxation from afar, which they could readily be fomented to resist. The resistance would be met with harassment, which would incite rebellion and ultimately division. You talk about a master strategist. If this thesis is correct, Lorenzo Ricci has been underestimated in history. And so have the Jesuits. And so has the Roman Catholic Church. And it proves one thing, to me at least, that Protestantism, even at that time, even so soon after being persecuted so badly in Europe that they fled to the new colonies for religious liberty, had forgotten the treachery of Jesuitism and had forgotten Rome's desire to rule the world, and failed to suspect, or at least failed to comprehend, Lorenzo Ricci's strategies in all of this. It says the philosophical similarities between Quakers and Loyolan Gnosticism should not escape our notice. Quaker, the term, was first used by an English judge in 1650 to ridicule how the leader of the denomination, George Fox, admonished him to, quote, tremble at the word of God, unquote. Fox summoned all who sought spiritual truth and peace to come out of the churches and seek an intimate personal relationship with Christ. I think I would have liked that guy to come out of the churches, come out of the established churches, and seek an intimate personal relationship with Christ. The Jesus of the Quakers spoke through inner illumination, a light available to all, having nothing to do with outward forms of ceremony, ritual, and creed. To the Quaker, every person was a walking church. Every heart was God's altar and throne. There was no need, therefore, to attend steeple houses, as they called them, or pay taxes to support a state church clergy, or doff a hat to a king or a commoner, or fight wars, or distinguish between sexes and social classes. Such doctrine, of course, was highly offensive to the Church of England, and so the Quakers were mercilessly persecuted as treasonous criminals. Now you can about imagine, if these are the tenets of the Quakers, they were an offense to the Queen. They were an offense to the King. They were an offense to the Church of England, which was essentially just a Catholic church that had thrown off the yoke of the papacy. They still had a hierarchical structure. They still had all the pomp and circumstance of a Roman Catholic church. They were still tyrannical. And they still venerated priests. In other words, they were still Catholic without the Pope at the helm. That's how I view the English church, the Church of England. It's Protestant in name only. It's just an angry Catholic church. It's a Catholic church that's had a couple 100-year tiff with the Pope is about what it amounts to. The Quakers, however, by my estimation out of reading from this book, they were biblical. They saw themselves as the temple of God. They doffed their hat for no human being, whether he be a king or a queen or a prince or a pope or a commoner. And they sought a personal relationship with Christ. They sought to live in peace with their neighbors. And they hated war. They saw war as one of the characteristics of the beast. And they sought to be different from the beast. Now, I don't know much more about Quakers than what I've read out of this book, but for so much of what I've read of this book of them, maybe I could be a Quaker. I don't know. But it says of these Quakers who were mercilessly persecuted as treasonous criminals in Great Britain, it says they found a haven across the Atlantic in the colony, conveniently granted by King Charles II to William Penn one of the more outspoken English Quakers. Charles granted the land to settle a debt the Crown owed to Penn's deceased father, Admiral Sir William Penn. Knowledgeable contemporaries publicly charged the young Penn with being a Jesuit in disguise. Actually, all Catholic clergy in England were, to a certain extent, in disguise, thanks to a law prohibiting Roman Catholics from wearing clerical garb. Remember, Roman Catholicism was suppressed in Protestant Great Britain. There were so many attempts of the papacy to take back Great Britain. One attempt in 1605 was an attempt to blow up the entire Parliament. The Gunpowder Plot of 1605, Guy Fawkes. And as a matter of survival, Great Britain had to suppress Roman Catholicism. And they had to kick the Jesuits out of the realm. But typical as the Jesuits, they never relent. They came back in disguise. Great Britain has been under a constant assault. By hook or by crook, the papacy is going to control Great Britain. I believe they do today, but that was their attitude back then. And trust me, their attitude is the same about this continent, about the United States of America. The Vatican insists on ruling the world as the vicar of Christ, and the Jesuits are assigned to see that that happens. And they will either accomplish their aim, or they will cease to be Jesuits. And if destroying this whole world is a consequence of their failure, I don't believe they would hesitate for a moment to destroy the whole world. Their objective, their sworn objective, is a global government under the papacy. And they would not exist if that were not their goal today. It says, knowledgeable contemporaries publicly charged the young Penn with being a Jesuit in disguise. And he says, actually, all Catholic clergy in England were to a certain extent in disguise, thanks to a law prohibiting Roman Catholics from wearing clerical garb. Now, I hate to stop right here in the middle of a thought, but we've run out of time, and I'll pick up where we left off tomorrow on the broadcast. And I appreciate your presence. I appreciate your interest in this book, and we'll continue tomorrow on the broadcast. Stay tuned for Nicholas Arthur and Cross the Border. See you tomorrow.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.